welcome to this part of the class. So at the moment we're in a 6-week series on what Buddhism means by freedom. The series is called The Taste of Freedom. Aryapala is the person who tends to do this class with the umpati. He's away, so the umpati asked me to stand in front. Aryapala also videos them, so we're videoing this as well, so if you find it interesting you can watch it again. Okay, so we're on week 5 of this 6-week series on what Buddhism means by freedom, and we do these 20-25 minute talks, and then we'll divide into groups at this time. So Jampati's given me the brief to talk about the second fetter, but before that I'll just give a very quick recap because some of you maybe haven't been for a while. There's 1 or 2 new people. So we're exploring what Buddhism means by freedom. Okay, it's really impossible for me to give you a resume or a summary of that. So basically, I think you could look at it from the point of view that freedom in Buddhism is a state of heart and mind, where you are in touch with a particular sort of confidence and a particular sort of sense of creativity, and you've got a particular sort of ethical sensitivity. Rujamati drew that out when he was introducing the meditation this morning, so that actually no matter how difficult the external circumstances are, there's always available to you an option to choose in a much more creative way. You're not limited by external conditions, you're not as affected by them. And last week the Umpati talked about in Buddhism, there isn't a word for mind as we have in Western languages. It's more chitta, which means heart, mind, intuition, and deeper instincts, deeper drives. Broadly speaking, you can sort of think about it just in terms of your experience. And so in a way that's what we're talking about when we're talking about liberating the mind, okay? So again, broadly speaking, the Buddha said that how our general experience as it is largely, this is quite subtle this, but I'm just giving you a ballpark picture, is largely based on our ethical actions in the past, okay? The attitudes that we've acted from, the attitudes that we've thought from, okay? So cause and effect conditionality is the key principle in Buddhism. And broadly speaking, you can see that this experience of mind or chitta, you can group it into 2, if you like, camps, to use that term, 2 sort of groups. One is what we tend to refer to as the creative mind, and the other one is the reactive mind. So the creative mind is great fun. The creative mind is where we all want to be. You feel alive, you feel engaged, you feel content, happy, connected with meaning. It's a very human state to be in, and it's sort of based on ethical, I suppose for want of a better word, purity. Your life is becoming more and more based in awareness, love, contentment, generosity, awareness of others, truthfulness, all those qualities, okay? And the reactive mind, I'm sure you can guess, it's the mind that's got little awareness, it's the mind, it's the mind that's faced up against the wall, literally, and it can't see, there's no options, it's just responding often out of frustration or anger or, in extreme cases, ill will, hatred. It's untruthful, it's desperately trying to protect itself in a particular sort of way. Basically, the part of the series of talks we're on now is we're looking at what's called the 3 fetters in Buddhism. There's 10. We're not going to talk about all of them, it's way too complex. But basically there's 3 fetters which bind us to this reactive mind. So to the extent that we're in the reactive mind, according to the Buddha, we have no real sense of what real freedom means, okay? So the word fetter in English, it translates as shackle or chain. It's like in olden times what the prisoners wore, you know, these shackles. So they wore them on their arms, and actually they put them on their legs as well. So you can imagine you can't move you're really, really limited. The shackles limit you, these chains really, really limit you. So this is a very strong metaphor, but this is what it's trying to get us to see, you know, that the reactive mind really limits us. And the fetters, I mean, there's different ways you can talk about them, but you could say, broadly speaking, that they're the forces or patterns within our minds which bind us to this reactive mind. So Buddhism would say, to the extent that we're not awakened, to the extent that the mind isn't awoken, we're bound by these fetters. Again, it's probably not that one day we break them like that. Maybe we do, but probably most of us is a process of dissolving them over time. So until we really see through the fetters, we can't break free of them. And in my experience, the first step is seeing that they actually exist in your own experience, noticing that they're actually there, they exist. It's not a theory, it's not an idea. But the fetters have an emotional aspect and a cognitive aspect as well. And so just briefly, I'm not going to say too much about it because last week the Ampati talked a lot about it, but the first fetter is this. It's got to do with this idea or view that we have that we're a fixed, permanent entity that's going to last forever. That's not in relation to the world or other people. Okay, so the Buddha didn't say that we didn't have a self. He didn't say that. What he said was that we've got it wrong. Our idea of what the self is wrong. And he's saying that the self is a sort of, if you like, a provisional thing that's based on conditions. So again, how we act in the past, now how we act, the values that we have, how we're living our life, that all deeply conditions the kind of mind we have, the kind of experience we have. So he's saying you can change the kind of mind you have, the kind of experience you have, if you base your life much more on this sort of the creative mind, these values. And if you do want to sort of see through this limited self of self, it's so easy to theorize about this and speculate on what no self is and all the rest of it. Maybe that's exciting and useful perhaps, but I think the first thing you got to do is really look at your life, and I've done this myself, I do this myself, and you've got to ask yourself, well, how positive am I? Come on, be honest. How positive am I? Am I reacting? You know, am I ungenerous? You know, do I bend the truth a bit? All of this sort of stuff, you really got to look at that and actually try and become much more positive and base your life on the qualities of metta, what the meditation regime actually led us in, mindfulness, all these qualities, and then you can begin to shift this fixed self of self, which actually leads to suffering. Okay, so I'm going to move on quickly to the second fetter. So I find this fetter myself very, very interesting, actually, because I think most of my life I've been stuck in it, to be quite honest with you. So Buddhism speaks of it as reliance on rites and rituals as ends in themselves. I'll repeat this: reliance on rites and rituals as ends in themselves. So it's sort of what it reminds me of. You know, I don't drink milk myself, but you know, in milk, you know, when I was growing up, I did. So my mother used to buy real milk, yeah, and then she used to buy semi-skimmed milk, okay, which is horrible. Why have it? Why bother? You know, who would want it? So, in a way, this fetter is like just feeding yourself on semi-skimmed milk all the time. You're not feeding yourself at riches. You're not actually enjoying life to the full, okay, and really connected, because basically it's all about living on the surface of life, a very thin, our sense of kind of our lives is quite thin, if you like, okay, as opposed to a nice big fat piece of cream on top of the milk, okay. And Sangharashita, the founder of the order and Triratna, he said that basically you could look at superficiality as we're just sort of living from ideas. We're living from ideas, but the deeper forces in us, our hearts, our intuitions, our guts, to use that word, are not really involved with what we're doing enough. So that's probably quite a common experience for some of us, and it's something I've really had to look at in my life quite a bit. And one of the ways I experience it in life is that my life begins to feel quite diluted. Quite diluted. It loses a certain sense of potency, and it's almost like I'm losing initiative or something like that. It feels like life is running me rather than I'm kind of really choosing what I want to do. So yeah, there's a lot that can be said about it, but it's really not being. And you can talk about it in many ways. In terms of Buddhist practice, you can just talk about it as going through the motions. So you might say yourself as a Buddhist, so you try and meditate every day, but sometimes you're in autopilot and you're not really engaged with what you're doing. It could be that you're not really clear on why you're practicing or what your goals are. But broadly speaking, it affects our lives as well. It might be that haven't got enough of a strong direction in your life, what you want to do, where you're going in your life, And I was talking with Natasha yesterday, and we were talking about films, and I have to mention this. I'm probably going to talk more than 20 minutes, I'm sorry. We were talking about films, and we got talking about a really beautiful film called Lost in Translation, with Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson and others in it. And it's one of my favourite films because I think it's really in some ways about this particular phenomena in life. She was a young woman who found herself in Tokyo with her husband, who was a photographer, who was very cool, in with musicians, had been with the right people, but actually just living really shallowly on the surface of life. And as she got to know him, she could see that, and she actually ended up being incredibly lonely in the relationship, and there was really nothing of substance between them. And then of course she meets Bill Murray, and suddenly the two of them connect and this friendship happens, and he was similar as well in a way, but their friendship brought depth into their lives, okay, so they went deeper because of communication. So it's there in life, Buddhism is just pointing to it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about a number of factors that keep us kind of on the surface of things, or with this sort of experience of drinking semi-skimmed milk. So basically, I think there's lots of things that sort of are conditions that leave us living on the surface of things. There's lots of things. You all probably could mention a number of things. So the first one is a very common thing, and it's I'm not going to go into it, but Buddhism really talks about it a lot in relation to bringing your attention to sensations and feelings, and kind of getting a sense of what is there and investigating it, okay? But the first one has got to do with this whole human tendency of turning our back on direct experience. So we want pleasant experience, and we'll do kind of anything for it. And a lot of the time, it's like we'll put a patch, un parche on our experience to try and make it a bit better. We never really address why we've got this thing that's recurring, that we're feeling, that makes us feel uncomfortable. It's quite a courageous thing to do, but really, unless you turn and face the depths of your experience and the heights, you're not going to really get to grips with this particular fetter, because we're tending to avoid the depths. Yeah, and like I said at the beginning, you know, this fetter has got to do with living on the surface of life. The second thing, which again I can talk a lot about, I could give many talks on this. The second thing is that keeps us kind of shackled by this fetter is internal conflict. Internal conflict. So there's a friend of mine, and he gave an amazing talk a number of years ago, and I've copied it and I've given it myself. And he talks about 5 characters in himself. Okay. He talks about he's got 5 main characters. I mean, I won't mention them all. He's an order member. One of them is the monk. You know, the other one is the sort of rock and roll rebel guy. You know, he's got another one that's the lover. He's got another one that's the scholar. I can't remember what the last one is. But he often has found in his life that they're all in conflict. You know, there's a sort of conflict going on between them. And his job has been to try and create a harmony between them and get a sort of sense of communication going on. I can very much relate to that myself. And to the extent that there's internal conflicts, you know, we mightn't be even that fully aware of them, but they go on, and actually they determine how we act. They determine how we act, okay? So you could talk about that in the groups as well. So that the third thing that sort of contributes to us staying on the surface of life is, again, what I highlighted about this film, Lost in Translation. It's sort of a lack of deeper human communication. You know, it's a lack of connectedness. It's a lack of friendships or relationships or whatever that you have where you're able to fully share the heights and depths of yourself, actually, because that sort of communication is really key. If you want to grow, and especially in the Buddhist path, the Buddha talked an awful lot about Sangha, about developing that sort of communication, that sort of friendship. And it helps a lot, actually, with the other 2 ones I mentioned previously. If you've got that sort of communication with people, that sort of friendship, you can get much more of a handle on your inner conflicts, and you'll have the resources to face your difficulties. And the final one, for any of you who were here a few weeks ago, Jamji asked me to do a presentation on the spiral path, and I talked about this quality of Shraddha, which is the ability it's a human quality. Buddhism has harnessed it, but it's a human quality got to do with the ability to appreciate value and meaning and beauty and all the kind of more refined emotions in life, okay? And to the extent that's not alive in us, it's gonna be hard to go deeper. We'll tend to stay on the surface of things. So briefly, I'm running to the end, drinking my milk. Sorry, it's not really working. So, I mean, this is something, again, we can talk about in the groups. The antidote to this fetter, you know, the antidote to superficiality. What is it? What do you think the antidote to superficiality is? What do you think the antidote to this fetter, kind of living in a way which is just going through the motions? What do you think it is? I mean, there's lots of them, but there's one kind of principle that's key. That's part of it. But yeah, so if you want to deepen your practice of meditation or Buddhism,
find pleasure in what you're doing in that moment.
yeah. And if it's an art you're doing, if you're a musician or you're a painter, what do you need to keep doing over time?
Consistency.
Training.
Yeah, so commitment. You got to really commit. You got to decide and commit fully to it. And on the Buddhist path, we talk about this. I'm not going to go into it, but we talk about this as going for refuge. That's the key fundamental act of a Buddhist. You know, you've committed yourself to the Buddha's path, and you know you're basing your life on the Buddha, his example, the Dharma, or his teachings, and you know the community of practitioners is the context you're practicing within. That doesn't mean you can't have friends who aren't Buddhists, obviously. You know, that's the sort of the waters of your life, so to speak. So I mean, finally, I mean, just to say just a few ideas, really. So what can we commit to? I mean, you'll decide that for yourself. But if you do find Buddhism useful, you could just think in terms of committing to come to the Saturdays every week or when you can, and talk more and learn more. You know, enjoy the meditations. The next one is interesting, and I'm still learning about this myself. I'm thinking more and more that on the Buddha's path, learning how to communicate is just as important as meditation. That's a thought that I'm having a lot more now, because Sangha is so fundamental and so key. I mean, I've assumed that I know how to communicate well, but actually, do I? I'm not so sure I do. You know, I've had to work a lot on that. So learning how to communicate is key. And again, this thing of Shraddha, appreciating value and beauty, whatever it is, yeah. And finally, I would say a sense of just reflect on. I mean, I don't like the word spiritual. You know, I really don't like that word. It sort of makes me feel, oof, you know, personally myself. But it's sort of like we need some sort of deeper meaning. We need to be in touch with some deeper path in life, because otherwise, it's just materialism these days. It's sort of Instagram, it's Facebook, it's Netflix, it's looking cool. You know, it's boring. It's boring. So it's like this sort of sense of freedom is exciting, exhilarating, blissful. You know, it draws the most out of you. Your good qualities are drawn out more. So it's sort of like having confidence that we can deeply and fundamentally change.